How do I run multiple commands on one line in PowerShell? In a CMD prompt, you can run 2 commands on one line like so. When I run this command in PowerShell, I get. Does PowerShell have an operator that allows me to quickly produce the equivalent of and in a CMD prompt? Any method of running 2 commands in one line will do. I know that I can make a script, but I'm looking for something a little more off the cuff.
Use a semicolon to chain commands in PowerShell. In PowerShell 7, we have pipeline chain operators, which allows you to add some conditional element to your sequential one-line commands. The operators are and this will run the second command only if the first one succeeds. This will run the second command only if the first one fails. Examples. Of course, you can chain them even more together like X and Y, Z, etc. This also works for old CMD-like commands like ipconfig. These operators use the $$ and $last exit code variables to determine if a pipeline failed. This allows you to use them with native commands and not just with cookielets or functions. Source: this URL.
A semicolon will link the commands as the previous answer stated, although there is a key difference to the behavior with the AND operator in the MS-DOS style command interpreter. In the command interpreter, the variable substitution takes place when the line is read. This allows some neat possibilities such as swapping variables without an interim. Would result in. As far as I know, there is no way to replicate this behavior in PowerShell. Some may argue that's a good thing. There is in fact a way to do this in PowerShell. It will result in a single line swapping of the variable values.
For PowerShell 5, default install for Windows machines for the foreseeable future, you can of course use a semicolon to separate statements, but all statements will be executed by default even if one fails. Personally, I prefer to run things so that if one thing fails the whole line stops in the replace, and I imagine a lot of other folks do as well. $error action preference lets you control the behavior of what happens when a statement fails but is a non-terminating error, which are most errors including command not found errors. You can set this variable $error action preference equals stop in order to emulate the behavior of and in Bash and PowerShell 7 for the scope of this variable. I have had trouble finding precise documentation for this behavior, but this variable seems to be dynamically scoped, so you can override it in a block temporarily if you don't want to set it globally. Finally, if you want something reusable, you can use this higher order function, which is then used as follows. Note in the examples above that here is not printed since fake command fails as it is not a real command. I have tested the code provided in this solution for both PowerShell 5 and 7 and it should be fully portable, at least on Windows. While PowerShell 7 should be very similar on different platforms, I did not test these commands on Linux or Mac OS.
This is the audience segment.